So good afternoon. It's Michael, Kate and Sally, but today we're joined by a very special guest of ours because we're going to have a conversation with one of our colleagues about life, COVID and how the last number of months have been. So let me hand over to Angie. Do you want to introduce us? Tell us who you are.
Yeah, happy to do that, Michael. So my name's Angie Lewis and I'm the Director for People Transformation at Companies House. Companies House is part of the civil service, if those of you might not be aware of that. And we're the organisation within the UK that register companies. We obviously do a lot more than that as well. You may have searched some of our amazing data to find out a particular company that you might be thinking about using. And as I said, we're an organisation of about 1,000 people. We are based primarily in Cardiff, but we also have bases in London, Edinburgh and Northern Ireland. So yeah, COVID particularly, we have the challenges of working in 4 different parts of the country, which is always very interesting. So yeah, that's who I am. And just in terms of the role that I've got, which sounds very, very lovely, people transformation, and it covers the HR aspects of an organisation, the estates, health and safety, business continuity, also change management and culture change. And I suppose actually all of those have really come to their fore in this time of a pandemic. But actually, from an organizational point of view, having them all together is a pretty awesome idea, because actually they are so important when you're thinking about your people. And it probably has really helped us to sort of challenge the whole idea of silos. So yeah, a bit unusual, but really looking forward to the conversation today.
So over to you, Sally. Do you want to kick us off with the first thought that we have, or first question we want to come up with?
Yeah, so in recent videos, Angie, we've been talking about the responsibility of leadership and how tough it's been, particularly for senior leaders in organisations, helping their people transition from an old way of working that was very traditional, it was very structured, that was a routine that people were familiar with, and navigating into something new. So we're really interested to know, what has been your leadership focus over the last 6 months, and how did you go about helping your organisation make that shift?
Really great question, Sally. And I think it's interesting because it's evolving every single day at the moment. But if I look back over the last 6 months, most definitely at the start of the pandemic, we actually moved most of our staff for working remotely about 2 weeks before the national lockdown. And we're able to pivot quite quickly in terms of getting people the equipment and the tools to be able to do their job. But we also had about 100 of our staff who still had to come in to work every day to provide essential services, a lot of which are still paper-based. So that balance in terms of supporting those staff, 80-90% of your workforce who are suddenly working remotely, but also making sure that those staff who are coming in every single day feel safe and secure, was really, really challenging. And I suppose what we definitely did at the beginning was a clear message around safety comes first. We are absolutely passionate about keeping our colleagues safe, and we'll do everything in our power, particularly for those in the offices, to make sure that happens. And then for our staff who were working remotely, it was more around, how can we work through this together? We haven't got all the answers as leaders. And definitely one of our biggest mantras has been, keep talking to us, telling us what's working, what isn't working, how can we improve? Our sort of key strapline at the beginning of COVID was, do what you can when you can. And we really felt that gave people permission and remove some of the anxiety in terms of, oh my gosh, all of this is going on in terms of my home life and what's going on in the world, and yet I've got to still do my job, etc. And that really worked well, because people felt they were supported. They still wanted passionately to do a great job for their customers, but they knew they could do it their way, which really helped. And I suppose we've evolved from that over the last sort of 4 or 5 months to say, okay, things are improving. Well, they were improving in terms of things that were back in place in our society, whether it be schooling or caring arrangements. But actually this point about, what do you need? What's working for you? What isn't? Has continued to be a theme. Our chief exec Louise did weekly videos. We did coffee and catch-ups nearly every 2 weeks as the executive. We had asked the exec events. I mean, internal communications has been awesome. That's the only way I can describe it. Our internal comms experts have just come to the fore, you know, giving us really great advice about how we can connect and engage, but also how we can keep morale and motivate people during this time. And so, you know, this point around how we've adapted and how we're learning now, some of the work we're doing now, Sally, is around, okay, we've pivoted, we've got people working remotely, but are we working smarter? Have we become just replaced some of our sort of lifted and shifted our poor practices we might have had in the office with a meeting culture and put them online and become virtual? So we're really looking now at how can we work smarter as well as virtually. So I hope that helps.
It does. What I'm interested about is obviously the emphasis on providing some sort of clarity. You said clear messages were important, and we've talked in earlier videos about we can't provide certainty, but we can provide clarity, and that's something that you've clearly focused on. I'm interested to know as well, from a communications perspective, were you doing communications with management in the organisation and employees, keeping everyone the same? How were you dividing up the messaging?
We had different channels. So, and again, we did surveys very early on to ask all staff about our approach to comms. Was it working? We were doing twice weekly sort of bulletins, the videos every week with our chief exec, and these coffee and catch ups. So there was a lot, particularly in the first 2 months. It was every sort of week there was something that was in place, and then there was more targeted communications for managers in terms of some of the advice, the policies, etc. And I think we've evolved again in that space because we also then used our networks. So in particular, our mental health advocates and first aiders, they became a key resource for us in terms of being available to respond to messages that we were landing, to get feedback. And in fact, definitely in the last couple of months, we tested out ideas with them in the first instance to think about how these might land with people. So it's this constant avenues of how can people feedback what's working and what isn't. And also the point you made there about the clarity, you know, we've been very honest about what we can tell people. We very early on sort of message that we didn't anticipate coming back into our offices whole scale until next March at the earliest. And that was a real shock to some of our colleagues, because I think to some degree, even if you're hearing stuff on the news, sometimes you sort of shut it out. And, you know, people loved working in our environments. You know, they loved our offices. They loved that culture. So we did do quite early messaging about this might be a long-term situation. We're not sure, but we're working on the worst case scenarios, because actually then anything better than that will be a positive. But we want to bring you with us while we do that. And that seemed to work really well, but definitely lots of different channels and constantly adapting them based on the feedback that we were getting.
That's quite an interesting message, isn't it, to people to say, you know, in March, we're going to be like this for 12 months minimum. And that's slightly at odds to all the other messaging we've had from government and from other organizations. How did it land in the organization?
Well, originally we sort of we targeted sort of January quite early on. So probably in about April, May, we were saying, look, we can't see any of this changing before Christmas. It'll be January. But very quickly, because we're involved, obviously I'm involved as well in that business continuity, you can find the material out there yourself about scenario planning, what's coming, what isn't. And we felt it was really important to give people some sort of certainty, particularly as we moved into sort of August, September, about childcare, about how they were going to manage. There was some anxiety about potentially them suddenly being asked to all come back in one go. So we needed to do that. And so we were trying to balance all the time. Look, this is the scenarios we've been looking at. They might not come to fruition. And if they don't, that's brilliant. And we will have this sort of more balanced approach. But let's work on all of those scenarios and let's give you some indication, particularly for some of our areas who absolutely would not need to come into our offices to carry out their core services. Let's give them some certainty around, well, actually, we're going to work in this way for many more months, because we've set everybody up. They've got all the kit they need. They've got amazing equipment. We've made sure that people have the right tools. So actually, we needed to also say to them that that wasn't a temporary arrangement.
It sounds like you've struck a real balance between being really decisive and quite planned in many ways, but also, like you said, involving everybody and getting feedback, and that communications being really two-way. And how representative of that is how you would usually see your culture and leadership?
Kate, I think pretty representative. And I said we're on a culture change journey anyway. And I suppose what COVID has done is accelerated some of the work that we'd already been doing around our networks and feedback loops and coffee and catch ups and this really dynamic sort of informal way for people to connect with their leaders, but also have a voice. But I think what it's done, and this is there are lots of things that are terrible about COVID, but one of the things it has done is really helped us think about our messaging and the connection and that two-way flow constantly. And we haven't got all the messages right. We've done a couple recently, particularly in terms of for our staff in our building here in Cardiff, in terms of trying to reduce risk and asking them not to sort of sit in different spaces, to have food, etc. That we did through written communications. It should have been not verbally, it should have been a verbal discussion. So we're learning, and what's really worked well is we then say, look, we got that one wrong. That didn't work. Right. Let's talk to you about this again. What will work for you? And recognizing there are different groups, and most definitely for our staff working in our buildings who are having to work in this very socially distanced, COVID secure way. We're doing much more face-to-face, virtually, to get messages across. But also then with the staff who are at home, we're doing work in terms of, well, what you don't all want to sit in front of these, the computers all the time. Do you want to see some emails? Do you want it through a written form? So I suppose it's dynamic, but we were on the right track, I suppose, Kate. But this has given us the most amazing learning experience we could have asked for.
Yeah. And what sorts of things do you think people have had to really stretch themselves with in terms of their skills and behaviours?
Definitely the digital skills. So using the tools. So we use Microsoft Teams. And again, I was talking about that with somebody today. Are we really maximizing using it effectively? Are we using it effectively for collaborative sessions? Are we using whiteboards? Are we using Jamboard? How are we making sure people feel connected, but you're also having meaningful discussions and not just using it in one way? So definitely digital capability and confidence. And actually that's raised across the organization just by the fact that people are trying things. We've also then used some of our sort of what I would call agile coaches who would in our digital space, but then we've asked them to work with us from a cultural perspective in terms of using agile techniques to help with day-to-day business. Because again, you've got to think about different ways to engage and connect with people if you're working virtually. So I would say those skills in particular, and then the leadership that goes with this, which is how we're going to lead in different ways, what support to that middle layer of managers, but also senior managers lead, skills in terms of incident management, crisis communication. It's ongoing. We are constantly learning. And as I said, it's not a case of everything's fine, is it? This is evolving constantly, and we're all learning, I think. And I think by being honest with staff about we haven't got all the answers, we're learning. We're all learning new skills. It's felt far more collaborative and far more, okay, what do we need to do? How are we going to do this?
It sounds like you're hugely energized by it.
Well, I am energized by because the learning is amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, it is amazing. However, I would be lying to you to say that it isn't incredibly draining, and it's not particularly pleasant things to be thinking about, different scenarios. And if you're naturally someone like me that gets energy from positivity, being surrounded by people, having spontaneous connections and face-to-face discussions, it's hard. But the spontaneous bit, which is the mindset bit, which is, gosh, look at what we're learning. Look at how people are coming through this. Look at how we're still delivering. So it's taking those little glimmers and holding on to them, I suppose.
What's really interesting listening to you, Ange, is that you're talking about a very well-established organization. You're talking about a very well-established culture. Now, you did say you're on a cultural change program, but you've been in there for a while, haven't you? So you're getting to something that you want. What's the experience been of bringing new people into the organization or promoting people into a different team where they won't have that established social network or professional network?
Well, it's been amazing, Michael. So in the last 6 months, we've recruited, I think it's just over 40 new people into the organisation. And there have been movements of people within the organisation, probably about 30 or 40 more. And I've got a huge testament to our recruitment team, who have just embraced sort of digital recruitment and onboarding. But again, this idea that our networks, so those networks that we had in place before COVID, have come to the fore, offering support to all those new people in terms of that sense of family, sense of connection, a sense of warmth that I can't even begin to tell you. So the feedback we've had from new starters at all levels and quite a lot of senior people is that the warmth with which they've been welcomed, that sort of compassion and that sense of this is who we are and the culture has come to life for them in a way that they didn't anticipate. Now, we still got to keep working at that, because we don't have all the artifacts that we had in the office, the symbols and all of those things. So again, it's thinking, how are we going to create different symbols, and how are we going to keep reinforcing our values and our behaviors through everything we do? But that was probably the thing at the beginning of this that I thought would be the most concerning. And yet, in a way, these networks have filled so many gaps. It's been amazing to see.
Yeah.
And they haven't been asked to do that. They've just done it.
Because I link back to what you said at the start, that you were also responsible for facilities. So you had, pre-COVID, you had this ability to influence everything, didn't you?
Yeah, it's amazing.
The working environment. Now you can't. Now you can't influence the bedroom the person is working in, or the table they're working in. And if we pitch culture too much against the symbols and the environment, we've just seen that it can crumble. And I'm interested for you to talk a little bit more about that, as to what do you replace the symbols with? What do you replace the physical with?
So then it's that, so I still need some of the symbols, because I've obviously got that core of people in my offices who I need to make sure feel that they're not working in these just very sterile places. So I'm working at that at the moment. How do you make a COVID secure environment for those in offices safe but also connected? It's quite challenging. I'm really keen to talk to anyone who's done it really well, but we are doing that. And again, that's more about the leadership and the support that people have. And then virtually, well, it is more the tools that we're using and the events that we're running. So cultural events. So we've just had, last week, I think we had 300 people on a culture community event for an hour, where different members of staff were talking about the networks that they're responsible for, working families, our faith network. So these networks are coming forward and talking about connection and priorities and plans that they might have, and they then become our symbols. They are representative of a world we want to be in.
How many of these networks have you got?
So we've got 25 different networks.
Wow.
With over half the workforce involved in them. And I suppose the bit I want to say is this is what I mean about a movement of change over the last 3 years. So that could be a coaching network. It could be an environmental network. It's our standard diversity and inclusion, different networks, carers networks, our menopause network. I could go on and on and on. And these are people who feel passionately about a particular subject, but they also feel passionately about wanting to be part of a change in the organization. And what connects them all is this belief in the organization that it's bigger than any one thing. And so therefore they see themselves as helping to drive that. And over the last 7 months, the way in which they have flourished, it's mind-blowing to see. Now, I'm a member of maybe 4 or 5, sponsor a couple, but actually there is something for everyone. And it's that sense of, through those, we have seen this connection, particularly for new people joining the organization. That's the culture. That's who we are.
There's something in what you're saying there, though, about identity, isn't it? I think before this, the people would have identified with the building and some of the amazing things that I know you had there in Companies House, which encouraged real creativity and collaboration. But actually, when you remove the building and you remove the estates and you remove all of those symbols, what's left is the relationships. And what you're talking about there is how You've really encouraged people to come together where they have a common view, a common belief, a common challenge. So almost creating these mini tribes.
Yep.
Actually, the thing that binds you together is the fact that you're all part of Companies House.
Yep.
And Companies House facilitates those discussions and facilitates those smaller tribes, if you like. So what's interesting, I think, is that you're not talking about teams, you're not talking about functions, you're not talking about silos. You're actually talking about going across the organisation, bringing people together around things that matter to them.
And I suppose, you know, my vision 3 years ago was to have networks of a culture community. Fast forward where we are now, I never anticipated what we would have. I used to talk, and I don't use it. I used to talk about infecting others. We don't use that anymore. But there is something about it is it's just evolving through passion. And you know, we talk about people's passions, but and if you'd see, we had this meeting last week and I did a poem during it because I felt so inspired by what I was listening to. This was colleagues from across the organization coming together, reaching out to each other, talking about things they want to change. Now, it might be personal for their particular area, but it's a common theme of change and connection and compassion for each other. That when you see it, that's why I talk about the power of networks. That's how we will get through something as, you know, huge as, you know, a pandemic, because, you know, that's what keeps people together. And leadership is important, of course it is, but it's only one strand, because you watch this and all we provide is the infrastructure to get some of these groups going. They then generate what they want to do and how they want to do it. And then you see that, well, actually, I'm going to work with that group because actually we've got, and, you know, we talk a lot, isn't it, about intersectionality now, where we're not just one thing. And that's truly what we're seeing at the moment. And as I said, it is unbelievable to watch.
You're getting a lot of human needs met there, aren't you, with that community and their sense of purpose and feeling like they can actually make a difference.
Yeah. And you know, I've said, you know, I when we talk about the groups, so, you know, I'll say, well, I'm a woman, so I'm on the women's network. You know, I have a disability, I'm a sponsor for that. You know, I'm passionate about supporting our mental health advocates. Having had cancer, I'm part of the cancer support network. You know, I'm a coach. So that's just me. There are so many of us who will identify, and just particularly when you're in a certain situation externally, which is so uncertain in our sort of private lives, knowing that there are these connections for so many things, you're never alone. And I should have said that was another one of our sort of mantras. Nobody will be left alone, nobody will feel isolated. And whether that's isolated because they live on their own or just because they felt isolated, because we did view ourselves as a community. And again, what you see, therefore, there is something for everybody, but under that umbrella of a common connection.
Yeah, it's really multi-dimensional for everybody.
Yeah. And I think as I'm listening to you, I mean, it's obvious if you've got more than half of the organisation involved in networks, then clearly they're going to be feeling that as well. They're going to be feeling that they're not isolated and they've got a lot in common with people. One of the things that we've been exploring over recent weeks is how do senior leaders, people in your position, maintain their own energy and resilience through all of this. And clearly you're energised, as Kate has picked up on, by the changes you're able to influence. But it's been a tough period. So, you know, how have you gone about actually maintaining your energy during this time?
Well, it's definitely from a professional point of view, those networks that I've just mentioned all give me some type of energy, either because of a shared understanding about how I might be feeling, but also through just the magic that they are just amazingly beautiful people who care about each other. That often will be the thing. And it's funny because Louise, my chief exec, we both say our most enjoyable times are the coffee and catch ups that we have with staff across the organization, because they remind us of those wonderful spontaneous encounters you had in the offices, but also, you know, ask exec or different meetings where you're just engaging with people, and there might be stuff going on in the chat and there's people asking questions and there's joy coming out of people even in really difficult times. But it's also that sense for me personally, what this has shown me over the last 7 months is not only that I really relied so much for my energy on those personal encounters with people face to face, and so you have to find another way to get that energy. And it's not always helpful to do it on a screen. So, it might be a phone call, or it might be I'm reading something, or I might listen to a podcast or do something. But also my garden. So for me, it's been nature, it's been growing things, it's been just things that you can control yourself. I think that's part of the message that I always say to people. If you can find ways to find something that you can control, it will always allow you to have more energy. But also, I do also pick a few people who will give me energy as well. So I'll think, God, I'm feeling a bit fed up. If I'd been in the office, I would have gone and found them. Well, I can ring them, I can have a chat to them. And I think that's all you can do really, is just reach out for those smaller networks that you might have, but find the things that just give you. And I talked, and Sally, I've mentioned to you jolts of joy. And my jolt, I'll find one every single day. It might just be some flowers on my desk, it might be candles, it might be a little conversation with somebody, it might be sitting in the garden. I mean, you've got to find things wherever, because this is a long haul, a really long haul.
I'm really interested in these jolts of joy. So we know there's a huge amount of research around gratitude.
Yeah.
So, do you mind me asking you personally if you keep a gratitude diary, or you have a moment every day where you're grateful for the joy that you found in the day?
So I have a journal which I write poetry anyway, Michael. So every day I write a poem, and in that poem I'll write about what's gone on for me. And there might be some stuff that isn't so good, but there'll always be something about what's being special about it. They're only a couple of lines, but they work for me. But also then I will say, I'm just show you. So I've got my flowers on my desk. Yep.
Yes.
I did those myself. I'm trying to try new skills, develop, sort of flower arranging.
You grew those yourself?
Yeah. So some of these are mine, but also then I've tried to do a flower arranging.
Wow.
I'm trying to do flower arranging. So anything that's pushing my creativity to keep my energy going, because I used to get it's back to, how do you get your energy? Creativity for me is so important. And if I can't get the immediate connection that you might have had when you were working together face to face, I've got to find it other ways. And, particularly for us organizationally, curiosity and creativity are really key. So I've got a role model for others that actually trying new things, using different parts of the brain, can give you that sense of well-being, albeit it might only be a jolt of joy, but a jolt of joy every day could be enough to just keep you going. And particularly when, that might dip some days.
Yeah, I've tried to laugh every day, and some days it isn't possible. But I did last night watch an episode of Top Gear and laugh my socks off from start to finish. So just having that moment of real bellyache laugh has just been so important over the last 7 months. So jolts of joy and bursts of laughter. It's
Yeah.
a good one. Yeah.
And nature, I'm sorry.
And
so
nature,
definitely I've been doing quite a bit with people where again, this is mindset, where people are talking about, oh, we're going into the winter, and I keep saying, stop these conversations. Okay, yes, there's some people love the winter anyway, but also remember, it's only bad clothes, not bad weather. You can get out. Come on. Just think about how you can find something. And I know I get some challenge, which is okay, but there's lots of tough stuff going on for people. Totally get it. I've got my own, thank you very much. But you just think, okay, but I can sit here and I can dwell on it. I can just, at the end of the day, you could become overwhelmed by it, or you can decide, no, okay, I am going to try and take back some control about those things that just something. And I know most of us would have been saying that even before what's happened over the last 6 or 7 months, but now it's even more critical than ever. So, and that's our job, isn't it? To try and remind people that it can be something really simple.
It really strikes me listening to you, what you're communicating is that real human centered, putting the person first.
Yeah, and it matters to us, Kate. We've, a lot of organizations talk about people first, but Companies House definitely, the things that when we talk about culture change, we also talk about culture cherish. And the things that we cherish are the compassion, the community, just inherent kindness that I've never come across before. There's not a week goes by when somebody doesn't make me feel humble for how kind they are, and kind when nobody's watching. you know, reaching out to somebody when nobody else is watching. And it happens all the time. People do it to me. It doesn't matter what role you're in, people do it. And I never want to lose that. And I think what COVID has done is just brought that to the sort of light, but also built on what we'd already started to work on.
I think that's actually a great place for us to perhaps close, isn't it? Actually, you've been talking, you know, right throughout this about the importance of relationships, the importance of kindness, and we're finishing on the importance of joy. And I think they're all such important messages for our leaders to really think about how can they engender that in their organisations.